Ever make a decision and immediately kind of feel like you need a rewind button, like your brain just played a cruel trick on you? Today, we're diving into why that happens, exploring that fascinating world of evolutionary psychology and behavioral economics.
Yeah, it's like we're running on this outdated software, using these mental shortcuts that totally worked for our ancestors, but not always ideal in the modern world, right? And this book, Seeking Wisdom, it helps us recognize those outdated patterns, and it gives us strategies to actually update our thinking.
So we're kind of debugging our brains today, using Seeking Wisdom, from Darwin to Munger as our guide. You ready to get a little introspective?
Absolutely. It's all about understanding our vulnerabilities, right? Those hidden biases and those quirks of our evolution so we can make more informed choices.
Let's start with the hardware then, our brains. This book dives into neurons, neurotransmitters, the whole shebang, but it's far from a boring biology lecture. Did you know even a simple compliment can light up your brain's reward system?
It's true. It's because compliments, like physical rewards, they trigger the release of dopamine.
Interesting.
But what's really fascinating is that while our genes, they kind of lay the groundwork, it's our environment that shapes the fine details. Imagine transplanting nerve cells from a quail into a chicken embryo.
Hold on. Are we talking about scientists creating some kind of hybrid bird monster?
Not quite a monster, but those transplanted cells can actually change the chicken's behavior.
Really?
Yeah. Depending on which cells are transplanted, the chicken might even start bobbing its head and crowing like a quail.
Whoa. That's wild. So it's like nature and nurture are playing this high-stakes game of telephone with our brains.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of ancient influences, the book talks about this hunter-gatherer hangover, basically how our caveman past still affects us today.
Right. So for millions of years, our ancestors lived in a world where survival meant being constantly alert to threats.
Right.
Even if those threats were just imagined, right? That's why even today we react so strongly to potential losses. We crave social approval, desire status.
So that mini heart attack I have every time I think I've lost my phone, that's just my inner caveman freaking out.
Exactly. Back then, losing a tool, it could be a matter of life or death. And those ancient instincts are still ingrained in us, even if the stakes aren't quite so high anymore. And these instincts don't just influence our reactions, they also affect how we respond to things like incentives, which Seeking Wisdom dives into deeply.
Yeah, it's all about motivations, right? Like figuring out what's driving someone's actions. Often, it's more than meets the eye. The book gives a chilling example of companies accidentally encouraging risky behavior with how they structure bonuses.
That's right. If a company's solely focused on short-term gains and rewards employees accordingly, it might inadvertently incentivize reckless decisions. You have to kind of look beyond the stated intentions and follow the trail of incentives to truly understand the why behind someone's actions.
Speaking of hidden influences, Seeking Wisdom also blew my mind with all the cognitive biases it revealed, like the contrast effect, for example. Did you know our brains are hardwired to make comparisons, even when those comparisons lead us astray?
Absolutely. The classic example is how a mediocre house suddenly seems like a dream home after you've toured a few fixer-uppers.
Right.
Our brains are constantly comparing, and those comparisons can seriously distort our perception of value.
It's like our brains try to trick us into thinking we've struck gold, even if it's just fool's gold. And don't even get me started on social proof.
Ah, yes, that's a big one. It's the everybody else is doing it mentality.
Right.
Think about things like fashion trends, viral challenges, or even investment bubbles. Social proof can be incredibly persuasive, even if the crowd is heading in the wrong direction.
So how do we break free from these mental shortcuts that seem almost hardwired into us?
Well, awareness is key, right? By understanding how our brains work and recognizing those potential pitfalls, we can start to, question our assumptions and seek more objective information.
Like having a mental warning label for our own biases.
Exactly.
But even with awareness, sometimes our own biology seems to work against us, especially when stress comes knocking.
Absolutely. When we're stressed, our ability to think clearly really takes a nosedive. Our brain perceives a loss of control, and we're more likely to make impulsive, short-sighted decisions.
It's like that moment when you've overanalyzed every possible option and just want to hurl your laptop across the room. Not that I've ever done that.
We've all been there.
Okay, maybe.
Seeking Wisdom reminds us that during those moments of peak stress, it's crucial to hit the pause button. Taking a break, practicing mindfulness, and focusing on what we can control can help us make more level-headed decisions.
Basically, don't let stress hijack your brain. Now, speaking of practical strategies, I have to admit, I was initially skeptical when the book started talking about checklists.
I understand the skepticism. Checklists, they sometimes feel like something you'd find in a pilot's cockpit or a surgeon's operating room. But Seeking Wisdom argues that checklists aren't just for those high-stakes professions. They can be incredibly helpful for any task that involves multiple steps or, complex decisions.
So are we talking about to-do lists, or is there a deeper level to this?
It's about creating a structured framework to guide our thinking and ensure we don't overlook any crucial elements.
So it's like having a mental safety net to catch those, oh, shoot, moments before they happen.
Precisely. And Seeking Wisdom also highlights the importance of backward thinking.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is backward thinking, and how does it work exactly?
Imagine you're trying to launch a new product. Instead of focusing solely on what needs to be done to make it a success, you'd start by asking, what could cause this product to fail?
That's a pretty bold approach. So instead of aiming for success, you're essentially mapping out all the ways you could fail.
Exactly. By identifying those potential failure points early on, you can proactively develop strategies to mitigate them, to making your plan much more robust.
So it's like flipping the script. I like it. It seems like we've covered a lot of ground already, from the biological wiring of our brains to evolutionary hangovers and the power of incentives, biases, stress management, and even checklists.
And through it all, the book emphasizes one crucial point. The more we understand the forces that shape our thinking, both conscious and unconscious, the better equipped we are to make sound decisions.
So it's not about becoming some kind of like emotionless, hyper-rational robot.
Right.
It's about using the knowledge of our own vulnerabilities to become more aware and make more rational, informed choices.
Precisely. We're all human, which means we're all prone to biases and, errors in judgment. Seeking Wisdom simply gives us the tools to recognize and navigate those human elements more effectively.
So we've tackled the why behind bad decisions, uncovering those hidden biases and mental shortcuts. But I'm really curious to delve into the practical tools and techniques Seeking Wisdom offers for making better choices. For a book called Seeking Wisdom, it seems to spend a surprising amount of time talking about numbers. Is there some secret code in math that unlocks better decisions?
Well, not a secret code exactly, but Seeking Wisdom definitely emphasizes the importance of having a solid grasp of numbers. And it's not about complex equations or anything like that. It's about using basic math to quantify, to count, to truly understand the relationships between things.
Okay, I'm listening. Even if math isn't my natural habitat, I'm always up for expanding my horizons.
Well, here's a simple example from the book. Saying something is cheap or expensive only has meaning when you compare it to something else, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. A $10 stock might seem like a steal, but if the company's grounding in billions of dollars of debt, it's suddenly not such a bargain.
Exactly. Another important concept is the difference between absolute and relative change.
Okay.
Imagine a drug that reduces the risk of a disease by 25%. Sounds pretty impressive, right?
It definitely does. Sign me up.
Hold on. What if the original risk was only 20 people in 1,000 getting the disease? The drug reduces that to 15 in 1,000. In absolute terms, that's only a 5-person difference.
Wow, okay. So the relative change, that 25% reduction, sounds dramatic.
Right.
But the actual impact is much smaller than you might initially think.
Precisely. It's about looking beyond those, attention-grabbing headlines and understanding the true magnitude of change.
It's a good reminder to be a bit skeptical of statistics and not just take them at face value. Dig a little deeper, understand the context.
Absolutely. And that skepticism is especially important when it comes to scientific research.
Oh,
yeah.
You're telling me not to blindly trust those lab coats and fancy research papers?
Well, it's not about distrusting science, but about understanding its limitations.
Okay.
Seeking Wisdom points out that the more studies conducted on a single topic, the more likely it is that some will show a statistically significant result, even if there's no real effect.
So it's like if you flip a coin enough times, you're bound to get a long streak of heads,
Yeah.
even though the odds are still 50-50.
Exactly. With so much research being published these days, it's easy to cherry-pick studies that support a particular viewpoint, even if it's not the most accurate one.
So how do we separate the signal from the noise? How do we know which studies to trust?
Good question. Look for studies that have been replicated by independent researchers. Pay attention to studies with large sample sizes and rigorous methodologies.
Okay.
And remember, a single study rarely provides the definitive answer. It's about looking at the weight of the evidence as a whole.
So, just like with those attention-grabbing statistics, we need to approach research with a critical eye. Now, shifting gears a bit, Seeking Wisdom also talks a lot about the importance of understanding the past. Not just our own personal histories, but also the broader sweep of history.
That's right. The book argues that history, both personal and global, can be an incredibly valuable guide for making decisions in the present.
It's like that old saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. All right.
Exactly. By studying our past choices, we can identify patterns, recognize mistakes, and hopefully avoid making those same blunders again and again.
So it's like having a historical database to draw on when faced with a tough decision.
Precisely. But it's not just about avoiding mistakes, it's also about understanding what's worked well in the past and why.
So we're not just looking for red flags, but also for those shining examples of success that we can learn from.
Absolutely. However, Seeking Wisdom also cautions against becoming overly reliant on the past, especially when conditions have changed.
That makes sense. Just because a company has a long track record of success doesn't mean they're immune to disruption, especially in today's rapidly changing world.
Exactly. The past can be a powerful teacher, but it shouldn't be our only guide. We need to be able to adapt our thinking and our approaches as circumstances evolve.
So how do we actually put this historical thinking into practice? Do we need to become like amateur historians, poring over old journals and dusty textbooks?
Well, Seeking Wisdom suggests a more, structured approach called a postmortem. Basically, it's a structured review of past decisions, both the successes and the failures.
So, like, if a project went completely off the rails, you'd gather the team and do a deep dive into what went wrong, what could have been done differently, and what lessons could be learned for future projects.
Exactly. And it's not about placing blame or dwelling on the negative.
Right.
It's about extracting valuable insights from our experiences, both positive and negative, so we can continually refine our decision-making process.
It sounds incredibly useful, though maybe a bit uncomfortable at times, especially if you were the one who made the mistake.
It can be for sure, but facing those mistakes head-on is essential for growth. And speaking of approaching challenges from a new angle, the book also talks about the power of backward thinking. We touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth exploring further.
I agree. I'm still wrapping my head around the concept. How does backward thinking work in a practical sense?
Imagine you're trying to achieve a specific goal. Maybe you're launching a new product, right? Instead of just focusing on all the things you need to do to make it a success, you'd start by asking yourself, what could cause this to fail?
So you're essentially playing devil's advocate with yourself, trying to poke holes in your own plans.
Exactly. By identifying those potential failure points up front, you can proactively develop strategies to mitigate them, making your plan much more robust.
That's a really interesting approach. Instead of just hoping for the best, you're actively preparing for the worst-case scenario.
Precisely. And Seeking Wisdom takes that a step further by encouraging us to consider the consequences of being wrong.
Okay, that sounds a bit ominous. What does that involve?
It means asking yourself, if my assumptions turn out to be wrong, what's the worst that could happen? And then what steps can I take to minimize that potential downside?
So it's like having a plan B or even a plan C just in case things don't go as expected.
Exactly. And it's especially important for decisions that involve significant risks.
Right.
The book actually uses Russian roulette as an example.
Right, yeah.
It perfectly illustrates why, even when the odds seem to be in your favor, the potential downside can be so catastrophic that it's not worth taking the risk.
Yeah. It's a sobering thought for sure. So it's about factoring in both the probability of success and the potential consequences of failure.
Precisely. And Seeking Wisdom stresses the importance of creating a margin of safety in our decisions, no matter what those decisions might be.
Okay, I've mostly heard that term used in investing. How does it apply more broadly?
It's about building in a buffer to protect us from unexpected events and, our own inevitable miscalculations.
Okay.
It's acknowledging that we can't predict the future with perfect accuracy,
Right.
and building in a cushion to absorb the shocks.
So like if you're estimating a project timeline, you'd add in some extra time to account for like potential delays, right?
Exactly. Or if you're making an investment, you'd look for opportunities where the price is significantly lower than your estimate of the intrinsic value, giving you a margin of safety if your calculations are off.
It's essentially about acknowledging that we're not perfect
Right.
and planning for the unexpected.
Precisely. Seeking Wisdom suggests applying this concept to all aspects of life: finances, relationships, career decisions.
So having a bit of wiggle room, a margin for error can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And you know what else can help with that? Checklists.
Oh, there they are again, those trusty checklists. Back for round 2.
They're just that versatile. Seeking wisdom highlights how valuable checklists can be when you're facing complex decisions or trying to avoid common mistakes.
All right, I'm convinced they're more than just to-do lists. But how do you even go about creating a checklist for a decision?
The book suggests starting by identifying all the crucial factors that need to be considered.
Okay.
Then brainstorm potential pitfalls to avoid and key questions to ask yourself.
So it's about creating a structured framework to guide your thinking and ensure you're considering all the angles.
Precisely. And remember, seeking wisdom emphasizes that checklists should be tailored to the specific decision at hand.
Right. No one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to decision-making.
Exactly. Another essential element of good decision-making is understanding cause and effect.
Okay.
If we're seeing a decline in sales, for example, we need to figure out what's at the root of that decline,
Right.
not just focus on the symptom of lower revenue.
Right.
Right. Seeking wisdom emphasizes the importance of tracing out the chain of events, both the intended and unintended consequences of our actions.
So it's like thinking several moves ahead in a game of chess, trying to anticipate the ripple effects of our choices.
Yes. And the book highlights how often we misinterpret correlations as causations.
Okay. Can you give me an example of that?
Sure. Imagine a study shows that people who drink a lot of coffee also tend to be more productive at work.
Okay.
Does that mean coffee directly causes increased productivity?
Well, it seems plausible. Coffee wakes you up, right?
It might, but it's also possible that there are other factors at play.
Okay.
Maybe those highly productive people are just more likely to work long hours,
Right.
and those long hours lead to more coffee breaks.
Ah, I see. So just because two things are correlated, like coffee drinking and productivity, doesn't necessarily mean one causes the other.
Precisely. Seeking wisdom encourages us to look for alternative explanations and avoid jumping to conclusions.
Yeah.
Correlation does not equal causation.
Gotcha. I feel like we've covered so much ground already. Numbers, history, backward thinking, margin of safety, checklists, cause and effect. It's a lot to process.
It is. Seeking wisdom is full of insightful concepts.
Yeah.
We'll continue exploring these ideas in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But before we move on, is there anything that's particularly resonating with you?
You know, I'm really intrigued by the idea of postmortems. Taking the time to systematically review past decisions, both the triumphs and the failures, seems like such a powerful tool for continuous improvement.
Yeah.
How about you? Anything standing out?
I think what's resonating most with me is the emphasis on understanding the limitations of our own knowledge and becoming comfortable with uncertainty. We all make mistakes. It's part of being human. The key is to learn from them and adapt.
We've covered some pretty fascinating concepts from Seeking Wisdom already. From like our brain's quirky wiring to those evolutionary hangovers, from the power of incentives to the importance of understanding cause and effect. But even with the best tools and techniques, we're still human, right?
Right.
Prone to biases and emotions that can totally cloud our judgment.
Yeah, and that's precisely where Seeking Wisdom really shines. It really delves into that human element of decision-making, those often overlooked factors that can make or break even the most well-thought-out plans.
Right, because at the end of the day, we're not dealing with perfectly rational robots.
Right.
We're dealing with people with all their quirks and contradictions.
Exactly. And one of the most crucial insights from the book is that ever-present influence of incentives.
Yeah. We've touched on this before, but it's worth revisiting because it's so fundamental. Sometimes people's actions, they might seem completely irrational until you kind of understand the motivations behind them.
Right. Yeah. It's like a hidden code. Once you crack that code, by understanding the incentives at play,
right,
their behavior suddenly makes perfect sense. Seeking Wisdom uses this, I think it's a thought-provoking example involving doctors.
Okay.
Imagine a scenario where a doctor recommends a medical procedure that might not actually be in the patient's best interest.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. Why would a doctor ever do something like that?
Well, if that doctor is paid per procedure, there's a clear financial incentive to perform more procedures, right? Even if they're not strictly necessary.
It's a good reminder that incentives can be incredibly powerful, and they're not always as transparent as we might think.
Right.
It's not always about money either.
You're absolutely right. Incentives can be social, emotional, reputational. For example, a CEO might make a risky acquisition just to boost their own ego or impress the board, even if it's a terrible business decision.
It's like that saying, follow the money. Except sometimes it's not about the money at all, right?
Yeah.
It's about understanding what truly motivates a person or a group.
Exactly.
And speaking of influence, we can't forget about the power of social proof.
Ah, yes. The everyone else is doing it phenomenon.
Right.
One of the most powerful forces in human behavior.
Yeah. We talked about it earlier in the context of cognitive biases, but I'm curious to hear more about how social proof plays out in the real world.
Well, think about things like fashion trends,
Okay.
viral challenges, even the restaurants we choose or the political opinions we hold.
Right.
We often look to others for cues about what's acceptable, desirable, or even correct.
Like that classic line, if everyone else jumped off a bridge, would you jump too?
Exactly. Social proof can be a powerful force for conformity.
Right.
But it can also lead us down some questionable paths if we're not careful.
So how do we resist that urge to just blindly follow the crowd? How do we cultivate more independent thinking?
Seeking wisdom stresses the importance of questioning our assumptions.
Okay.
And not just accepting something as true just because everyone else seems to believe it, right?
Yeah.
We need to evaluate the evidence for ourselves.
It's about being willing to stand out from the crowd, right?
Yeah,
To be the one who asks, but is that really true? Even when it feels uncomfortable.
precisely. And while we're challenging those external influences, it's equally important to kind of turn that critical lens inward
Okay.
and understand our own strengths and weaknesses.
Right. Because we all have our areas of expertise and
Yeah.
areas where we struggle.
Exactly. Seeking wisdom reminds us that we're more likely to make sound decisions when we're operating within our circle of competence,
Okay.
playing to our strengths, and avoiding situations where our weaknesses are likely to trip us up.
So if I'm terrible at math, maybe a career as an accountant isn't the best fit for me, no matter how much money I could potentially make.
Precisely. It's about recognizing our own limitations and making choices that align with our natural abilities and inclinations.
Seeking wisdom also emphasizes the importance of having realistic expectations.
That's so important because unrealistic expectations, they're a recipe for disappointment and frustration.
Right.
We need to be honest with ourselves about what we can reasonably achieve.
It's about finding that balance between aiming high, but also not setting ourselves up for failure, right?
Right.
It's like that saying, expect the best, prepare for the worst.
Exactly. Seeking wisdom encourages us to cultivate a balanced perspective, acknowledging both the potential for success and the possibility of setbacks.
Being prepared for those inevitable bumps in the road can make all the difference.
It really can.
But it seems like seeking wisdom goes even deeper than that, talking about the importance of having the right values.
That's right. It's not just about making smart decisions.
Right.
It's about making decisions that align with our core values and principles.
So it's about the why behind our decisions just as much as the what.
Exactly. Seeking wisdom emphasizes the importance of honesty, integrity, and a commitment to lifelong learning.
It's about making choices that reflect the kind of person we want to be, not just the outcomes we want to achieve.
Precisely. And finally, seeking wisdom reminds us that we don't have to navigate this journey alone.
Oh, that's an important reminder. We all need a little help sometimes.
We do.
What does the book suggest?
It emphasizes the value of seeking out mentors,
Okay.
those who have already navigated similar challenges and can offer guidance and support.
So it's about surrounding ourselves with wise people that we can learn from, people who've been there, done that.
Exactly. But it's not a one-way street, right?
Right.
It's also about sharing our own experiences and helping others along the way.
It's about building a community of wisdom seekers,
Yeah.
supporting each other on the path to better decision making.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive into seeking wisdom, from our brain's quirky wiring to evolutionary hangovers, from the power of incentives to the importance of values. It's been an incredible journey.
It truly has. And I think the most important takeaway is that seeking wisdom isn't just a book to be, read and then shelved.
Right.
It's a call to action.
Right.
An invitation to make wisdom a lifelong pursuit.
Absolutely. It's about constantly learning, questioning, refining our thinking,
Yes.
and striving to make, better choices every single day.
Every single day.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into seeking wisdom. We hope you found these insights as valuable as we have. Until next time, keep seeking wisdom.